Chapter 14. She woke up in the dark, alone. Panic gripped her. Eventually, she forced herself to calm down and search for clues to where she was and how to escape. Moonlight peeked through cracks in the walls, illuminating the basic outline of the structure. She was in some sort of barn or warehouse. "You're awake, finally." "Where am I?" A striking sound echoed, and seconds later a flame burst to life. A soft amber glow cast playful shadows around the building. Until she felt the warmth radiating from the fire, Kessa hadn't realized she'd been cold. Her body was aching, movement only making it worse. The beating she'd received at the hands of those thugs was manifesting. Sore, cold, disoriented, and completely uncertain of her future, it was all she could do to stay still and quiet. The strength of the fire grew, devouring the darkness hungrily. "You're in no immediate danger, miss." "You really don't like answering questions, do you?" she rasped, trying to squeeze the pain out of her head. "The real question is what you need to know." "Or what do I know already?" Firelight frolicked over his features, illustrating a droll expression. "Enlighten me, then." "You're around 35, average height, average build." Thank you for that average assessment." "I'm not done. Your voice is powerful, mysterious, demands respect. You wear green, brown, and probably black, colors of a hunter or chameleon. You like to blend in. Dark brown hair, cut concisely, brown eyes, clean shaven. Shaving daily takes discipline, patience. And your haircut tells me you like things precise. You're skilled with throwing knives and daggers. You're the lead spy in a small network of elite spies who probably serve the king or a wealthy lord or lady. Someone with a lot of money. Given the various weapons, ropes, and chains hanging around this place, and the magnificent obstacle course, I'd say this is your training ground, and I'm your new recruit." Clapping his hands together, he let out a boisterous laugh. "Very good." 4 additional men, all hooded, slithered out of the shadows, eyeing her suspiciously like dangerous asps ready to strike if the need arose. "See, boys, I told you with some training she'll be perfect." "How'd you figure it out?" "You all breathe loudly for spies. The rest was rather self-explanatory. This building is well-equipped and is relatively new, a major expense. So, who can afford and needs a group of spies? A monarch or person so wealthy and powerful that they have enemies to spy on," she explained, her head starting to pound again. "You told me that you were a spy, and that you'd been watching me since I arrived. I don't know anything valuable or important. So, disregarding information, there are basically 3 reasons for spying on me. You want to either protect, recruit, or kill me. And since you saved me from those men, thanks for that, by the way, I eliminated your wanting to kill me, which leaves protect or recruit. I decided on the latter, because you delayed rescuing me, which you wouldn't do if you were simply trying to protect me. You wanted to see how I handled myself. A test." "So, I guess the only question left is, are you interested?" "I don't know, T," one of the men interjected skeptically. "We know so little about her personality, not to mention she's only 14. "Her potential is staggering, though," another piped up. "She managed to figure out things very quickly. Not everything, but enough. I agree with T." "A young girl? Really?" Huddling together, their voices became lower, but more forceful, as if this were an old, frequently debated argument. Kessa waited, pondering how, for once, she appreciated the tormenting lessons of observation her sister had inflicted on her over the last couple of years. As Equestria progressed in her training, she'd shared what she was learning with her sister. Resenting being used for target practice, so to speak, Kessa had been rebellious, stubborn, and difficult, but she'd taken in a thing or four. Then Equestria and Pantheus had insisted she join the Aquenian Guard as well, and she'd learned a thing or two more, when she'd shown up. It was dark out, hinting at the extent she'd been there. A while. Was Quinn concerned about her? Would her sister be notified of her absence? If she was, would she be worried about her? Finally, the man she presumed was the leader, T, flashed a cheeky grin her way, whispered something to his confederates, and said, "Miss Recruit, we are willing to train you, but naturally we've conditions and rules." Naturally. First, you must understand that our job is extremely dangerous and challenging, with many physical, intellectual, and ethical demands. You seldom receive any acknowledgement or appreciation, and you could easily be killed, tortured, or maimed. But not in that order, Kessa grinned, ignoring how her gut twisted at his warnings. All but T frowned at her frivolity. "That aside, the next condition is very, very serious," one of T's companions said gravely. "You must take the oath of secrecy. If you ever break this pact, you and all that you love will perish." "What?" "You must promise never to discuss our group, clandestine services. What we do, what you do, or anything relating to the existence of this company. You must swear on your life and the lives of your loved ones not to break this promise. If you do, your life and the lives of your friends and family will be forfeit. You must never, under any circumstances, break your oath." Doubt crept into her mind as she recalled the numerous lectures she'd endured due to her impulsiveness. After all, this oath was severe, and she wasn't comfortable accepting something so intense without serious consideration. I don't know. I mean, it's like he said, you don't know me, and I don't know you. Maybe a little time to think about it?" She scrutinized their tense expressions and added, "Please?" T took a step back, nodding. 7 days. You must not discuss what has occurred here, under any circumstances. Do you understand?" She nodded. Suddenly, one of the men behind her touched her in an odd way. When she moved to complain, all went black. "Kessa, where have you been?" Eyebrows knitting together, she groaned, cracking an eyelid. The pain from the beating the thugs gave her had certainly not subsided. "Look at you! Black and blue, cuts all over. Are you all right? What happened?" Shooing him away, Kessa rolled over. "Ask me in the morning, Quinn." "It's past noon. You didn't come back last night. I was worried." Propping herself on her elbows, she moaned as her body protested. "You're a mess. What happened?" "I ran into some less than savory characters on the outskirts of town. Did my sister come by?" "Haven't seen her." "Same old routine then, I guess." "I'm sorry about my tutor. He's—" "Don't worry about it, Quinn." "Learn anything interesting?" "Yes." Quinn's brown eyes lit up. "I learned about the dragons. Do you remember learning about the dragons, Kessa?" The question prompted a vivid memory of sitting in a classroom, surrounded by classmates, all eyes glued to the teacher in avid interest. It was no mystery why Quinn's eyes had lit up. The history of the dragons was captivating. Her teacher's crystalline voice still sang in her ears. His scales, jet black and harder than rock, Othos, the father of the dragons, creates environments with a wave of his long tail. His mate of iridescent scales, Icel, the mother of dragons, creates atmospheres with a puff of her breath. Life of all sorts trickles from their magnificence, like water drips from a sieve. A nursery for 3 of their offspring, Nogard, our world was shaped. Nightchet, delightful daughter, shed scales as refined and colorful as opals as she frolicked. Embedded into the earth, they stemmed the ancient race known as Maysayers, who were as colorful and refined as the scales from which they grew. Children, can you guess who are their descendants? Renonians. Correct. Phryne, searing sun, inherited his father's black scales, but they were also speckled with red and brown hues. Rolling and crawling, as babies do, Phryne's heat scorched his playpen. A simple cough or hiccup from him left red-hot embers smoldering, which soon transfigured into the Foragers, ancestors of the Copperundish. Elpon, boisterous boy, his scales of gray, green, and brown glittered as he flew to great heights, then crashed down with a thunderous crash. Playful antics that fashioned a dragon's peak and showered the earth with his scales. The Fories, our ancestors, sprang from where they landed. Othos and Icel, pleased with the flourishing races produced and nurtured by their offspring, spent plenty of time on this world ere decreeing that all dragons must depart. And so the great dragons left us to our fate. Yes, I remember learning about the dragons, Kessa answered Quinn. Fascinating history, isn't it? I can't help feeling like there was a lot missing, though. Quinn's head bobbed up and down in enthusiastic agreement. I felt the same way. I'd love to study more about the subject. So, Kessa took a breath. What are we doing today? You're pretty beat up. You should take it easy. Kessa didn't want to pass up the opportunity to rest longer and was sorely tempted to lie her head back down. But it simply wasn't in her nature to leave a friend hanging. I'll be down in a couple of minutes. Would you like some salve for your injuries? I've got some. I would. Thanks, Quinn. The next few days flew by as Kessa healed and settled back into her routine. She only caught glimpses of Equestria here and there, always looking strained and worn out, but ecstatic. At first, Kessa was perturbed that her big sister hadn't come by to check on how she was feeling. It had been months. Summer had given way to fall. Surely she'd heard about Kessa's entanglement. Didn't she care? After a couple more days, Kessa's perturbation wore down to just plain hurt. She felt downright neglected. Finally caving, she went to the barracks to visit Equestria herself. Reaching the huge wooden fence surrounding the barracks, she knocked on the human-sized door. When she declared her request to see her sister, she was informed that social calls weren't allowed during training hours. It took a lot more than that to discourage her. She snuck around, found a climbable tree close enough to the fence, and hopped over it. Once she was in the compound, she searched until she saw Equestria training beyond a split-rail fence. Hurtling over the second fence, she barged through 2 sets of trainees and reached her sister. Why haven't you come to visit me? Kessa demanded impatiently. Kessa! Equestria looked around in obvious distress. You shouldn't be here. Don't give me that. Answer my question, please. I'm sorry, I just haven't had the time. Training is very intense, and you've never gone even 2 weeks without seeing me or checking in on me. And that was when I was safe under Pantheus's roof. It's been months. You have no idea what I've been through, or where I've been, or anything. On the contrary, Miss Decora. The sound of his voice startled the 14-year-old, and she swiveled round to behold Lord Fane, standing on a raised platform overlooking the training yard. Your sister's been acquainted with your whereabouts, your daily activities, and... He leapt down gracefully, like a cat. What you've been through. Her eyes flashing with true indignation, Kessa glared at him. You mean Quinn's been your little spy? His eyebrow cocking, he replied, Was that a giant leap for you? She huffed, humiliated by his harsh assessment of her intelligence. Naturally, Quinn would pass on any information his master asked for. I don't appreciate being spied on, she managed, folding her arms. Think of it as managing your safety and well-being, then, Fane said, and keeping your sister informed, as she'd requested, several times. Disregarding that last tidbit of information, Kessa snarled, As if I'd place my safety and well-being in your hands. I don't trust you as blindly as my sister does. Kessa, Equestria gasped exasperatedly. So, you know what I've been up to, she said, turning to her sister. That still doesn't explain why you haven't come to see me. I've asked her not to. Fane took a step closer. The action reminded Kessa of a lion, padding closer to its prey, preparing to pounce. She was no intimidated deer, though. She stood her ground. I don't think you appreciate the magnitude of your sister's talent, or the importance of her training. Complete attention and devotion are required if she is to achieve her full potential. She cannot afford distractions. Is that what I am? She glanced at her sister, unable to hide the quiver in her voice. A distraction? Most certainly, the dungeon keeper decreed. Though there was a hint of remorse in her eyes, Equestria's body language only indicated determination and resolve. She wouldn't bend any more than Fane would. Fane's tone softened a little. Family is always a distraction. He placed his hand on Equestria's arm. The gesture unnerved Kessa. He said, Courage. These circumstances won't last forever. His words had a calming effect, as he'd intended. Suddenly, his entire demeanor stiffened, and he said to Kessa, Now go, and do not charge through my training grounds again, Miss Decora, or I'll have my students use you for target practice. Usually Kessa would defy any threats, like a mongoose facing down a cobra, but something in his expression made her swiftly acquiesce. As she walked away, she overheard her sister asking about hand grips. Unable to resist a backward glance, she saw Equestria grasp the dungeon keeper's arm as instructed. As he was explaining a technique, Kessa was disturbed by the way her sister was peering up at him, with her big brown eyes. Finally, realizing that Quinn's warning of virtual abandonment by trainees did, in fact, apply to her sister, Kessa had no qualms with accepting T's proposal. She had nothing better to do, and besides, learning spycraft sounded right up her alley. She was assigned the temporary code name Recruit. T informed her that only a select few, including himself, would ever know her true name and identity. And after she'd passed her training, she'd be allotted a new code name. Her arduous training in espionage started the very next day. 1 year later, Kessa could scale practically any wall, pick anyone's pocket, unlock any padlock, crack most safes, and throw daggers with decent accuracy. Thomas, previously known as T, explained that the skills of a thief and spy were very similar, if not interchangeable, because thieves had to be covert and spies were sometimes required to steal. The difference being that spies didn't steal out of greed, and thieves were only covert for their own benefit. Pleased with her progress overall, Thomas was only troubled by Kessa's apparent inability to control her emotions. In this regard, training had proven futile. Mastering one's emotions was difficult, but for Kessa it was exceptionally challenging. Her darker emotions were remarkably intense, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. And under their influence, Kessa was best compared to a tornado. Any hint of frustration or anger ultimately resulted in the loss of focus, precision, and fine-tuned perception. Perhaps if she were a thug, it wouldn't matter as much. As a spy, though, she needed serenity, conviction, and decisiveness. Because the physical aspects of the job were well in hand, Thomas concentrated on the emotional demands. He taught Kessa how to employ techniques such as deep breathing, counting, self-imaging, and refocusing to help her maintain control. Another 2.5 months of strenuous training saw Kessa improve in every way. Emotionally, she'd become significantly calmer. Whether she'd developed a mastery over her emotions or had simply learned to hide her lack of composure was hard to say. Thomas preferred to believe it was the former and prepared Kessa for her first assignment. It was a simple one, Thomas told her. On the outskirts of the castle, there was a small brown house. The occupant was the king's pastry cook, a crafty man suspected of selling confidential information to rebel spies and, quite possibly, devising an assassination attempt. Kessa was to provide cover for a senior spy as he searched the house for any proof of the allegations. They were to leave the house as if they'd never been there. It was imperative that their presence go unnoticed. Thomas recommended that Kessa get some much-needed rest prior to the evening's endeavor. Feeling pent-up, nervous, but determined, Kessa thought it would be impossible for her to sleep at all, but Thomas's wisdom was displayed yet again. Kessa slept in her bed at headquarters until she was awakened by her mentor's knocking and calling her code name. Grumbling that she was awake, Kessa threw off the covers, swung her legs off the bed, shivered because of the cold, and stretched. Wiping the sleep out of her eyes, she padded over to the door and opened it. "Thomas?" Kessa greeted, looking at the stocky black man standing next to him. A little taller than Kessa and a little shorter than Thomas, he appeared healthy and fit, but weathered like well-preserved aged leather. His salt and pepper hair was cut short, with more salt than pepper near his temples. Wrinkles framed the edges of his lips and his eyes. Silently appreciating how well he wore his age, Kessa bent her head in greeting. "Recruit, meet Otto." "My partner for this evening, I presume?" In response, Otto looked at Thomas. Kessa was no mind reader, but she didn't have to be. Skepticism and wariness were written across his face. "Yes, I'm young and new," Kessa said, guessing the reason behind his hesitation. "But you can count on me to follow each and every one of your commands to the letter. You are in charge." Otto's almost black eyes hinted at the type of intelligence and experience needed for a spy to live long enough to be senior. They scanned her pensively before he reached out and shook her hand. "Let's be off then," he said, gesturing for her to proceed. A frigid, wintry wind blew patches of cloud across a waxing moon, engulfing them in eerie white light. Visibility was good under that unsettling glow, and Otto and Kessa moved quickly in the shadows, passing row upon row of wattle and daub, brick or stone houses and shops. Many servants of the castle lived in this district, and under King Ash's rule it was known as a lucrative neighborhood, but Cassius was nowhere near as generous. Regardless of the financial strife that shrouded Akara like the dark wing of a malevolent dragon, the shop and homeowners sacrificed much to keep their beloved stomping ground respectful. Kessa admired their dedication. The smell of wood smoke sparked visions of people cuddling close to their fires or snuggling, warm in their beds, a thought that was infinitely more comforting than pulling her cloak tightly about her. It was too late and too cold for any decent Cyrenean to be out, which would make their job that much easier. Finally, they arrived at their destination, a plain 2-story A-frame home. It was a hop, skip, and a jump away from the main road, nestled behind a carpentry shop. Even easier. Crossing the snow-covered lawn, bedecked with trees and decorative bushes, the spies reached the quiet, dark, and somewhat isolated domicile. Peeking in through the windows, Kessa checked for movement. Nothing. Her companion signaled for her to circle the house and determined the easiest point of access. The front door was the best option. Kessa shivered, pinning herself against the wattle and daub of the house, her eyes peeled for witnesses. After adjusting the tightness of her hair bun, Kessa oiled the door hinges while her companion picked the rather modest padlock. As the door swung slowly and quietly open, she scanned the area one more time and slipped in after her companion. The house was small and sparsely furnished. The front room was equipped with a table and 2 wooden stools. A single bed was shoved in the corner against the back wall and the wood paneling of a staircase. The staircase, which led up to a loft where a large desk could be seen, was rickety and had no railing. On the bed was a heavy wool blanket that moved up and down as the individual within breathed. There was a faint sound of snoring. The place was dark and cool in the wake of a dying fire, its embers glowing dimly, but it still provided a respite from the biting winds outside. Motioning for her to keep a lookout, Otto snuck up the stairs soundlessly. Thinking she might as well use her time wisely, Kessa began searching the downstairs room for secret compartments. A large painting of a willow tree caught her eye. Something about it seemed off. Perhaps it was the odd placement of a painting that size. Lifting the corner of the painting, she perceived a loud bang sounded from the loft, as though a heavy book had fallen to the floor. Kessa cursed under her breath as the body in the bed stirred. Moving with speed and stealth, she slid under the bed, contemplating what she'd do if the pastry cook decided to check out the noise. He didn't. She stayed put, waiting for the sound of snoring again. Sliding out from under the bed, she assessed its occupant. He'd shifted slightly, facing the room. His cheeks were puffy, as if he'd stuffed them with 2 of his pastries, and he evidently hadn't shaven in a while. Examining his eye movement and the rhythm of his breathing, Kessa concluded he was asleep and popped out of her hiding place. Noticing her partner creeping down the stairs, she indicated the painting, moving toward it quietly. Kessa watched as he touched the ordinary wooden frame, tilting it so he could peek behind it. She heard a distinct snap. While her brain properly deduced what had happened, her hand flew forward, catching the falling painting before it clattered to the floor. Amazed at the speed of her own reflexes, she breathed again. Otto stared at her, in what appeared to be a mixture of relief and incredulity. Nailed to the wall behind the painting was an ostensibly blank piece of paper. Pondering the point of a blank piece of paper behind a frame, Kessa deftly tied a knot in the broken string on the back of the artwork. It was dark. Perhaps they couldn't see what was on the paper. Perhaps it was some sort of message in itself. She was contemplating the possibilities when Otto seized the painting from her hands, taking her by surprise. The painting clattered to the floor, waking the man in the bed. Flinging herself against the wall, Kessa froze, while her companion slunk to the floor. The pastry chef sat up, blinked a couple of times, adjusted his position, cuddled back into his pillow, and started to snore again. Kessa's eyes flashed with indignant fire as she glared at Odo. He was a senior spy, with years of experience under his belt, and yet he'd already made 3 clumsy, infantile mistakes. This was an easy job, a lot easier than any of her training exercises, in fact. There was no way this should be happening. Either he was getting too old for the trade, or he was trying to get them caught. Picking up the painting, she placed it carefully back on the wall, gasping when 3 daggers simultaneously flew into the fabric of her cloak, pinning her forward into the wall. The pastry cook leapt from his bed, ramming right into Odo, who just stood up. She hadn't seen the knife that was now embedded in her companion until she'd heard him grunt in pain. Otto's face screwed up as the realization of his doom hit him. His eyes, wide, unfocused, glossy, rolled to look at her just before he slumped to the floor. Dark blood pooled beneath him. He held the dagger hilt as if that action alone might stave off death. His head lolled to one side, then he moved no more. Fear coursed through Kessa's veins as the pastry cook reoriented toward her. Blood spattered on his hand. Already feeling nauseous as well as terrified, she squeezed her eyes shut to avoid seeing any more blood. Although she'd been working stringently with Thomas to overcome her phobia, she didn't quite trust herself not to faint. Suddenly, remembering she could move, she tore her cloak free from the daggers. Gripping their handles, Kessa ripped them from the wall and whipped 3 of them toward her foe. He deflected them easily, advancing toward her with brutal sluggishness, like a gaboon viper setting up his final ambush. Rapidly calculating her options, Kessa realized why he could afford to move so slowly. His rat was absolutely ensnared. Her pursuer laughed at her realization, chilling her to the bone. She tossed the final dagger into the staircase paneling, glancing at the pastry cook, who appeared confused by her action, and then made her move. Leaping onto the bed, she bounded over to the corner and, using the dagger hilt as leverage, catapulted herself upward, landing gracefully halfway up the staircase. Now it was her turn to laugh, watching as the man stood stock still, a shocked expression on his face. Knowing he wouldn't stand there forever, she lunged up the rest of the stairs and saw her method of escape, a solitary window just large enough for her to fit through. Recalling her earlier inspection of the house, she was certain there was nothing beneath the window, but it was a drop. Pastry cook had started up the stairs. She was out of time. Quickly opening the window, she hopped out, landing with a roll. The snow crunched beneath her as she sprinted away from the house, not bothering to check if she was pursued. A bola weapon wrapped around her legs, causing her to trip. Sprawling ungracefully, Kessa was barely able to protect her head from the impact with the snow-covered ground. "Nice try, kitty cat." Gaboon Viper was again slithering toward her, just as sluggishly as before. His deep baritone voice, etched with traces of humor, vibrated her senses. Her feet entangled, she scuttled backwards on her bottom, attempting to extricate her legs from the bola. She wasn't fast enough. The pastry cook stepped on the bola, preventing her escape. Leaning over her with a devious grin, he said, "You're mine now, and you're going to tell me everything I want to know, kitty cat." His power-packed punch knocked her out cold.